There's a huge amount of misinformation around martial arts, and a lot of it's coming from martial artists themselves. When I first walked into a Taekwondo school about 23 years ago, I wanted to learn how to fight because violence was part of my life and I wanted to get control back over it instead of it controlling me. And I became obsessed with training. I read martial arts manuals, instructionals, magazines, cover to cover. I watched martial arts movies, and I trained with people who had experience in other styles such as Wing Chun Kung Fu or Hapkido. And then I sparred with a kickboxer and realised I still didn't know much about fighting at all. And then I grappled with someone who had a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they absolutely manhandled me. I had a situation in reality where I felt helpless, and then I realised I'd mostly wasted a couple of years of training. I was shocked at how many so-called martial arts schools taught their students nothing of practical benefit. Before this, I thought that they must all be valid or effective in some way. How could they be running schools and have so many students and have lasted for sometimes hundreds of years if they didn't work? But after a few of these experiences, I changed everything. I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I eventually got a black belt in that. I've trained Muay Thai, boxing, MMA, informally trained in other styles like Judo and with some Kyokushin people, Kyokushin Karate. I competed in different combat sports. I worked as a bouncer and security guard and in some other careers that involve use of force at times as part of the job. And in my opinion, when martial arts schools do not actually teach their students how to fight and do not improve their students' ability to defend themselves, in my opinion, that's more like a form of martially inspired performance art than martial art. So how do we differentiate between martial arts that work in reality and those that don't? Schools that provide something useful to someone like me and those that don't. This is actually a very difficult question for many people to answer because much of what people know about fighting is informed by what they've seen in popular media like movies and video games or books or what they've been told within the bubble of their martial arts school. And asking any random martial artist, anyone with a black belt, certainly doesn't help because there is zero consistency between them. They're all going to have completely different opinions. Most of it's going to conflict with each other. And your nearest school might be excellent or complete garbage or anything between. You have no way of knowing if you don't have any other information. We can't rely on opinion alone. I'm making this video to explain what you can rely on. Before I go on, there's no problem with having a purely performative or meditative or health aspect and so on, as long as it's made clear to the students that they are not learning how to fight when they do this. Some gyms offer many types of training, different types with classes in what they might call tricking, for example, or cardio and kettlebell classes, and then also offering kickboxing classes. There's a lot of crossover between different kinds of training. The skills, coordination, athleticism you might pick up from other activities can help with your martial arts training, like running, swimming, weightlifting, dancing, and so on. There is some benefit, and I'm not denying that in any way. You might even find more value in a martial arts school as a social venue than a way of learning self-defense or how to fight. And that's great. But this is not why I personally started training 23 years ago. I wanted to learn how to fight. And if that's our goal, how are we supposed to differentiate between these schools, these different schools, if we don't know much about martial arts or fighting in the first place? First of all, you need to understand that demonstrations are meaningless. Breaking boards, performing choreographed routines, demos with compliant training partners. This tells us nothing about how effective a system is or how the people performing it would fare in reality. It might be impressive and entertaining and feel persuasive, but beyond that, it's thin air. It's like someone trying to show you how good they are at surfing by standing on a surfboard on the beach, not in the water. Maybe they can do handstands and backflips on the board. Meanwhile, they haven't even proven that they know how to swim at this point. Some are also very dramatic in their demos and they can appear intimidating, and the person they're demonstrating on might appear to be getting hurt. They might even put their partner in protective gear during the demo. And this is all completely unnecessary. There's no reason to hurt your partner during a demo or appear intimidating to the people you're instructing or demonstrating to. This again proves nothing. They're not fighting. That kind of performance is often more about ego than anything else. Demos don't prove or disprove the efficacy of a style or a school, so you can give it the same weight as opinion. So if you respect and acknowledge the experience and expertise of the person providing that opinion. You might choose to give it some weight. It might be good information, but it proves nothing. So we have to move beyond this and get down to first principles so that we can separate the wheat from the chaff. We don't need to talk to any instructor or practitioner. We don't need opinions. All martial arts self-optimise to get better at whatever they are being tested against. Techniques, methods, and systems develop and evolve under whatever arbitrary selective pressure is being applied to them. If that test is not actually fighting or sport or even sparring, the only test you have remaining, the only way that you can make any kind of evaluation is personal opinion. Without any other test, a martial art will only change to fit the theories and aesthetic preferences of the instructors and practitioners, and as a result, it evolves in the opposite direction to effectiveness in a real fight. Over time, this kind of feedback loop can lead to some very strange, flamboyant, and nonsensical results. It moves closer to dance and further away from fighting. A system that works in reality cannot be designed from the top down. They can only emerge from the conditions that we choose for success and failure. If we choose fighting as the condition for success, then the art, the style, the school will evolve to improve performance under those conditions. There needs to be this constant feedback loop between the success condition and the way the school trains. So when you're looking at different styles, ask yourself, how do they test their system, and does their training allow them to adapt and evolve to get better at this test? What tests are appropriate for evaluating or developing a martial art? We simply need to test them against whatever skills they claim to be teaching in their school. If their intention is to develop the ability to punch other people in the face while not getting punched themselves, are they testing for that? If they claim to specialise in controlling and pinning people to the ground, are they testing against a resisting opponent who is doing the same thing and trying to stop them? And I'm not just talking about one fight or one match. Hundreds, thousands of fights, hundreds and thousands of participants, all of them working toward making adjustments to improve their performance in the next match. That might sound extreme to some, but it can be done, and it has been done. And this is why the styles that have undergone this process dominate others in a real fight. Some examples are boxing, Muay Thai, Kyokushin Karate, Daido Juku Karate, Savate, Greco Freestyle and Folk Wrestling, Judo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Sambo, many more. However, some combat sports like Taekwondo have such limited rule sets and conditions that very little of the skills that they learn can transfer to a real fight. Although I believe there is an argument to be made that the leg dexterity and balance you learn can assist when training in a different style or as a supplement to other training. However, you may gain just as much benefit from doing something like breakdancing or mountain climbing. It's also true that if selective pressure is applied in the form of competition under a specific rule set, the style does become stronger in that area they specialise in and weak or non-existent basically in the areas they do not. The art optimises and evolves to perform better under the rule set. That does not make a specialised style useless under other rules or conditions. It just means there will be gaps in the system outside the skills they specialised in. Most styles tend to focus on one of the three main ranges or phases of fighting: the stand-up striking range, the clinch, and the ground. Cross-training in systems so that your skill set covers each of these ranges is a very good idea if you're interested in self-defense. It's always good to try to cover every range. Mixed rule sets such as MMA reveal the weaknesses of specialists, but we can learn how they work together, how we need to adapt each style to fit in the pieces of the puzzle. Mixed rule sets are necessary to understand how fighting works, which is why the UFC was so sorely needed for martial arts in general. What we call MMA these days has been around in different forms forever, but this is the first time we've had a generalized mixed rule set become so successful on an international level with many competitors. Having a combat sport aspect is not absolutely necessary for an effective martial art to exist, but it is of great benefit to any martial art, as long as the rules and conditions don't become too far detached from reality, as with the Taekwondo example. It doesn't need to be every student in the entire school who competes and fights, by the way. It just greatly benefits the school if some of the practitioners at least get out there, compete, and bring back that experience to share with their training partners. Their competitive experience will typically make them the best conditioned, toughest, most technically proficient students in the school, who help mature the style to make it more robust and effective. When I competed, I wasn't interested necessarily in being an athlete at all. I saw it as a way to desensitize myself to stress. Competition was a part of my training, it wasn't the purpose of my training. The one thing that must not be done is to remove sparring. This is the moment the martial art dies as a system of fighting. And it can happen to any system, including boxing or BJJ, and it has happened many times in history. The end result is that students end up miming what would otherwise be effective techniques with no functional knowledge of how to apply it in a real fight. A singular technique taught in a class by an instructor is like a blueprint. You can think of it like a blueprint. You have to take that blueprint and use it to build the house on your own. That involves experimenting with it on someone who is trying to stop you. And when you fail, you make modifications until you find more success. Constant failure is necessary. It's a reality of the process. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Every student has to rediscover each and every technique for themselves in this way to integrate it into the larger system that they've already learned. There should be opening attacks, feints, combinations, defenses, contingencies, and so on. This integration does not happen without sparring. Until you spar, you are only learning individual techniques. You are not learning a system. The feedback loop of constant testing, failure, and adjustment is absolutely necessary, and there must be a culture of continuous improvement. When I was first shown a triangle choke in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I was able to mimic the technique on the very first night that I was shown it. It was about 6 months before I started really setting it up and catching other white belts in the choke from time to time. I was still unable to get it working on higher belts. After about 2 years, I was fairly confident with the technique, but I knew that I still had a lot to learn, as there were plenty of people I couldn't catch at my gym. So it's a grind. It takes a lot of time. It takes endless experimentation and incremental improvement. You don't just learn it once and know it. Some jiu-jitsu, aikido, karate schools who don't spar or compete, but they train techniques that are otherwise very effective and proven as a component within a fighting system. They don't produce capable fighters because they lack these critical elements of martial arts training that we've discussed. There's a very common saying you'll hear in the martial arts world that all styles are equally valid and it's only the individual practitioner that matters. A martial art is not about the individual. It's the culture within the school, the training methods, the sum total experience of all the people who train the art, the system that has emerged and evolved in response to testing under the chosen conditions. If you want to decide which martial art to train in, what is most effective and appropriate for your needs, you have to assess the thing in its entirety, not an individual. This false equivalency, saying that all styles are equal and effective in their own way, is a delusion. It's often the response they'll give you when their style is tested and fails. Even the schools who refuse to spar or compete will occasionally have one rogue individual who actually believes in what they're doing, and they get out there and test it and they fail. And there might be dozens of these failures. When it doesn't go well, they'll say, it wasn't the art that failed, it was this individual who was a poor example. They're the one who failed, not my martial art, not my school, not my style. This excuses them of any responsibility or association with the failure. They refuse to engage with the evidence. Individual prowess is a completely different question to systemic effectiveness. The crux of all this is that the difference between a martial art and martially inspired performance art is how it's tested.